I'm Derek Colson. I'm a technical leader with Mandiant's Security Transformation Services. We handle security architecture and security remediation for our clients. I've been at Mandiant since 2009, but I took a 3-year break to work on Russ's team at Equifax.
So obviously, security as a general rule is complex, and it's frustrating when it comes time to implement things, but when you add in a policy dynamic, it makes it even more difficult to navigate. The path to security, it's not only murky, it also identifies some conflicting requirements. You can get into situations where you have one person defining something that is seen as a negative connotation to many people, but when you look at it from the business perspective, the compliance itself is actually a way for you to drive performance of security in the entire organization. So we're going to hopefully take you through a few examples like that. We're going to review some of the challenges that you'll have with existing systems just using a regular policy-based framework. We're also going to highlight some of the gaps with those existing regimes here. We're going to show you some ways to use compliance to drive better security and better compliance.
So as Russ said, high-level agenda is first start out with reviewing what we see as the chaos caused by existing systems, and then dive into a different approach, a recommended approach that has worked for us, and review some examples throughout that. And then for anyone still awake, by the end of it, we'll have a little bit of Q&A. And if you stay awake for the entire presentation, Russ is offering 1 free credit report. As long as you haven't already used it this year, that's his offer.
That's the only exclusion that applies, really. You just can't have downloaded a free one this year. But if you haven't, then I'm going to give out free credit reports to everybody. So.
And a free credit lock, too, right?
Also, free freeze.
Freeze, sorry, not the lock. The lock.
Yeah, the lock actually is pretty awesome, too. You should use that, too. But yeah, free freezes for everybody. All right, so when we take let's dive right into where we find the pain points. When we take a look at the governance documents that come from a policy, what you'll find in those overlapping characteristics I mentioned earlier is you'll see things like sometimes there's a cryptography standard that's defined in one of the processes, and it conflicts with the cryptography standard in another process. And that's because the people that define those two policies, not only do they not usually work together, they're in total organizational silos, right? So they don't even see each other. You also have confusion about who's supposed to implement something. You have confusion about the responsibility of defining the requirement, and then you have responsibility of implementing the requirement not being defined either. So with the two of those together, it can make a mess of anybody going through to implement it. Then when it comes time for you to put those policies into an implementation plan, either giving it to the person who has to implement it directly or via another party to implement it, it's just a disaster usually for policies because somebody cut and pasted a policy and it's hard to translate into implementation.
Now let's say you find the requirements or maybe some implementation guides. It's hard to figure out which policy does this make me compliant with, right? You read them as single documents. They don't link back to that, and they don't typically link back to a process by which you have to consume those requirements. And of course, to make everything worse, the security teams typically are not working towards the same goal, which we'll dive into more later, but they'll often have these different objectives depending on the department within security or other departments like, say, procurement, right, within the organization. And their processes are very infrequently aligned. The backstop for all of this is supposed to be the security review process that someone goes through when they're trying to buy something or when they're trying to launch an application, but I find that there's generally 2 types of security review processes that people engage.
Most people's favorite is the choose your own adventure, so that's where you know somebody in the organization or you have a hint that somebody's going to make it easy for you to get compliant or to get through the process, and so that's the route that the individual takes. There are tons of difficulties for that. Not only does it depend on who you start with, and so there's inconsistent results that come out, but you may also get someone saying, yes, you've done everything you need to do, and then at the end, That has nothing to do with compliance. You're not going to pass an audit because of it. You're not secure because of it. You just went to talk to one of the people in the hundreds of Lego blocks pieces of the apparatus, and it doesn't really give you the solve that you're looking for. So that's a couple of things we're going to touch on here. You don't start with choose your own adventure if you want a standard outcome.
And that person you find might not even have the context of where they exist in the process. They think they own it all, but they don't. The second one is what I call no way out. Typically, it's a system-driven process. Could not be, but it's one of those where you get into it and you have no idea when it's going to end. You're on step 3. You don't know if there's 10 steps or 15. You don't know how long those steps take. When you get to the end, bam, someone hits you with a new request. You got to go talk to this team now. And that team is probably going to ask you the exact same questions, just in a slightly different way. So you have to copy. You can't even copy and paste the answers that you've given, right? You have to rewrite it. You might even have to rewrite documentation that you've already created for something else to provide to those teams. And it just leads to intense frustration for anyone trying to launch. So as you go down the path, maybe you'll find your security policies. You come across them and you're like, this is long. How do I implement any of these? Are these for me? Some of these are HR based. I'm not in charge of that. And so you move on. You go and you find the security architect. I made this kind of look like me, but before Russ took the top of my hair.
I don't apologize for that. You look great.
So you engage the security architect or advisor, and they've got their own set of requirements, maybe some implementation guides. And some are a little extreme. Like you've got to have heartbeat-based biometric authentication. You're like, does Azure AD support that? Is that a thing? Okta? Like, what is this? And they're going to insist that their set of requirements is the only one that you have to do. This is the important one, the priority for you. But in the end, you say, okay, so if I finish all of these, is this going to help me get my ISO 27001 or my SOC 2? And they're like, I don't know. Are you talking to me about compliance? You've got to go talk to the compliance people. That's really dumb. I don't deal with that, right? So you get over to security compliance, and first thing you do is say, hey, can I have a list of all of the requirements that I need to implement? They're like, listen, we've got to meet with you and review them. So a couple weeks later, you're in a room with 4 people. You don't know why it takes 4 people. And they're reading through, and they're just like, do you log? You've got a log. I think it's logging that you need, right? And some of the good ones will actually have their own implementation guidance, which is great, except for they're different than the guidance the security architecture team gave you. And when you ask, which set of requirements should I implement? They're like, hey, we just need you to pass the audit. Just focus on what we're doing. You've got to pass the audit, which is this big missed opportunity for all of these teams to drive the exact same regime for the organization.
And if you ran into another wrong path here, let's say you go to the IR team, right? So you're going to the security team, you're like, all right, what do I need? And they say, well, good Lord, you need a WAF. You got to make sure that you're sending all your logs to the right place. Let's look through the channel, make sure you got the IDS, IPS in spot. You've got some endpoint agents. You're all good to go. Get down to the end, and then you say, all right, well, are we going to pass our audit? And the auditor asks you, well, where's the evidence for the joiner leaver process? To which most of the people in that conversation go, I don't even know what you're talking about. Where's the joiner leaver process? Is that something I get from the heartbeat authentication technique? I don't know what that is. And back to the frame of reference here, you want everybody working towards the same goal. Well, if 98% of the people don't even know the words you just used, pretty good chance you're not going to get to the same goal. So what do you end up with if you build your system off of these policies in these siloed methods? You implement all of the breakaway controls with the choose your own adventure. Well, that makes a system that's not only difficult to implement, it's very hard to audit, and it's super difficult to measure. The net result is a security program that people avoid, which doesn't serve anybody, because not only are you not going to get the results you want, but it's also not going to be as secure.
So the little show of hands, how many people have gone through themselves, start to end, the security review process at their company? Like, I need to start an application. One. If you own a control, have you gone through the process, like you're a user, you go to the intranet, and you try to figure out how to implement that control? Because I find that the processes get a lot better when the people that own them actually try to pretend that they're a consumer and go through and start them.
And let's shift gears here. We're going to give you a different approach, how we tackled some of these problems. When you look at how you should set up a program, our advice would be you treat everybody in this process, going through the process that Darius just described, treat them as a customer. Make it a customer-focused experience. Treat them as you would want to be treated. You want to make sure that they're working together to enable the business. They're trying to launch this new service after all. And as a general rule, we don't find situations where somebody says, yes, please let me risk my mortgage by sending out a bad service. They want it to be secure too. In many ways, they don't know how. And so what we can do is we can make them easy for folks to understand. Only make it as complex as you need to, and then make sure that they are consumable and auditable from the beginning. If you do that, you're going to be able to align these up really quickly. We have a ton of examples of this or that, so we're going to try to break these away for you now in some forced choices. What we would recommend is you get your approach to be more structured. You try to make that approach proactive, adaptable, measurable, and collaborative. And the reason we're separating these is because the methods we described in the beginning are often fragmented, reactive, rigid, and subjective, and they're reinforced by these silos. The reason that you want to try to do these instead is because that holistic approach of a structured layout, if you can say these are all of the places where people interact with security and compliance, these are all the places where you would proactively do work, that forms an adaptable system because everybody knows where they need to go. And then if you're measuring things, and this is what I think Derek and I have found for almost every aspect of this, as you build that measurement into the control framework, it forces that collaboration in a way that you may not have considered. So it's difficult for you to have siloed approaches when everybody knows that number is supposed to be 7 and it's 4.
So when you build a control set or a framework, right, you have to define your core team and stakeholders. The first 3 here, security, risk, compliance, legal, privacy, they're pretty obvious. That's typically the owners of these frameworks. Security architecture and enterprise architecture I have on the list, not just because I'm a security architect, but also because those folks typically own the implementation of the controls, right? Or own the design of it. They're also pretty good at breaking down a component into its parts that are owned by certain people and that have processes and level of effort defined for them. So those top 4 are really, I think, the core team. Obviously, the control owners, often these IT teams or security teams get this list of controls from the risk team, and they don't feel ownership of them because it's just an output, right? You have to give this control set to them and have them develop it themselves so they feel like they own it. Now, the core team guides them through that process and makes sure that they're meeting requirements. But those control owners, again, have to feel that ownership. And obviously the business owners as well, and other key stakeholders, not only do they know the requirements, but in the end, they're the ones that accept the risk. They own the risk for that application or business that they're running, and have to accept this overall control set and any risks that are taken with it. Consultants can be good arbitrators. They also have external expertise in and experience with developing these sets. But I think the most important part is that someone has to be in charge. I've talked to clients that have said, we started with a framework, had a company come in, help us build one, but it just sat because no one could ever agree on it. So there has to be someone that understands the overall risk landscape of the business, understands that this result is not going to be perfect for everyone, but that it's more important to get it done to start reducing risk within the organization and starting alignment. I personally like attorneys to play this role because they're very good overall arbitrators and risk consultants. But the important thing is that someone can get it done.
All right, so you got a couple of different ways to start. Our advice would be you start with a standard and you customize after that. Many reasons to do that. Number one, it's going to simplify the audit because you're going to use language that somebody else is going to recognize. I think Derek comments, one of the legal folks that we use, our beloved Nick Oldham, and I would often talk about as long as the auditor can read something and from what you had customized sounds similar enough to NIST, they can look at it and say, well, this isn't exactly NIST, but it's close enough. I definitely recognize the words. That's going to simplify the entire process because if you think about how difficult it is for you to implement, imagine now you've got to explain why you're implementing it that way to a person that may not be as technically sound as you are on that particular topic. So the more that you can get a lingua franca for everybody to use, the easier it is for everybody to understand, yeah, you're talking about crypto, it's going to be in this location. And you get to remove all of the customization pieces at the very beginning if you start with the standard. Not to mention the fact that somebody is likely looking at this from an expert view. They've likely thought of something that maybe you didn't think about. And that panel of experts are maintaining this usually for the big standards. They're doing this while you're doing your regular business work. The last case would be on things like PCI or when you have specific control set descriptions for scope. In those cases, you also, if you follow the model that we were describing, you have a very smooth place to add PCI specific requirements, and it can differentiate from the general requirements because that's the way the framework was built. If you took CSF, for example, it's assuming you're going to take it and customize it for yourself. And so they built these little hooks to exactly the places that you would control for scope.
So once you pick a standard, you're going to then kind of start to customize it for your reality, right? And that's quite the balancing act. First, there's always external expectations or even internal that you have that you can't just say, hey, we follow NIST, right? So let's say you're under an FTC consent order. The requirements from the FTC are going to have to be a large portion or maybe a small portion of the requirements within your control set. Again, contractual, there might be some contractual requirements that a lot of the customers had. I think that part of this effort, though, is to push back against those unique requirements that customers expect of you so that you can get onto a control set that's traceable. And the next part is going to be your security aspirations. Where do you want to go? Can you use this effort to push your security program forward? But you also have to balance that with the current state. Where are you at now? Remembering that in the end, you have to pass an audit to stay in business.
You have got to make sure you look at how you're succeeding today. If you go in with that aspirational mindset and say, yes, every single vulnerability should always be resolved in every single place that it's located in, and today you only do that in 5% of the cases, you've got a 95% hill climb. So Derek will bring up often our conversation, the most difficult conversations we had and the most useful were the ones where we were trying to make sure we balance being aspirational and pushing the organization to a place that you feel might be more secure. But what if you failed all the audits in the process? You spend as much time doing these remediations from regulators coming back and saying you've got to follow these things or from clients or anything else. How does that further the security program? So that balancing act is one of the most important things for you to pay attention to going forward.
So once you've picked it and you've defined all those requirements, you're going to have to start dividing and duplicating controls. And the reason you do that is principally to limit the scope of audit failure or control failure for a single control. We've got a bunch of examples coming up, so I won't belabor that point a little bit, but you're also going to divide for different scopes. Maybe you have a PCI scope or a different environment that you need to scope differently for each control. And you also want to divide them up into controls based on responsibility. And I think this is the key part, is driving responsibility to the correct stakeholders. A single control, when you read it from NIST, could really have 3 or 4 or 5 people that are responsible for implementing portions of that control.
we go into some of the common pitfalls that we've seen, not defining what non-compliance means. If you don't take anything else away from the rest of the conversation and you're already falling asleep, wake up now. Wake up. What you want to do is define how many things you manage, whatever the inventory is. Some set of those are compliant with your policy or your control, and some set are not. So non-compliant and compliant, that's really 90% of your work. Then the control moves the non-compliant things into compliant. If you just do that, you're going to pass most of the audits. Because as long as you're not blind to the activity that is happening within the organization, and you've got a remediation plan, and you know which assets or things or people are not compliant, and you're bringing them into compliance, that is most of what you have. That's most of the information you need to pass. Using all or any to the scoping thing that Derek was describing, this is a huge mistake that I see people do. All vulnerabilities will be patched. Well, that means if they find one vulnerability that's not patched, now it's not compliant. So you need to be careful about the language that says any or all, because chances are there's a segment of the population that needs to use a risk-based approach to determine how many of those are approached in what way. You also want to be specific about immediate or non-specific timeframes. The minute a vulnerability happens, these other 12 things happen. Well, that's probably not true. Or if you want to make sure that something happens as, notification occurs immediately. Well, what's immediate? Nanoseconds, microseconds? You got to be careful how those can trip you up. And, if I broke this up into a simple thing to take away, you want to be specific enough to provide advice. This is what we used to chat about all the time, but not so specific that you're going to be forced into a solution that you're going to be stuck with. Because remember, once you codify these things and they start auditing you, that's going to lock you into that until you get to a future state of changing.
And the other big piece being data classification versus data type. A lot of people write controls based on data classification. So maybe they say, hey, our DLP program blocks all classified data from leaving the network. And then you look at the classified data classification, and it's like PCI, okay, great. Card data and PI. And then it says something like network diagrams. So you go from a DLP program that can find 9-digit numbers to a DLP program that is then struggling to figure out, do I scan this like PNG to figure out if two nodes are connecting to determine what is a network diagram? And that can really, really cause a lot of issues, not just in control failure, but just inefficiency within those detection programs. So I like to focus on specific data types. You can also update your data classifications, but that seems to be a little hard.
So you've got a couple of different things to prevent bleed out of these inconsistent requirements. One of those, and we're describing the whole set here as creating control failure firewalls, where you want to maintain this failure point in a small area. So one of those might be something you look at for spam protection, and this is at system entry and exit, right? And so this is something we have probably all seen. They're going to detect and act on unsolicited messages. Well, that's great, okay? But if I broke this up now into a couple of different places where that might be true, well, it might be true for the corporate inbound email, and maybe you could just plug in something that looks at corporate inbound email. Great. And I pat myself on the back and I'm done. The problem is, I bet a bunch of your systems also do outbound production email. I bet they send alerts to your customers. I bet there's an application in there somewhere. God forbid, I don't know how many times we talked with people about STP relays. You've got those types of things that will be bound by that first statement. And I can almost guarantee you, somewhere in your organization, there is something not using that spam protection. And so you want to differentiate those two so that you can create a firewall where maybe you fail the second one, but you're not going to fail the first control. Hopefully that drives this point home. When you're looking at where you're going to assign that responsibility, it kind of shows the brittleness of the previous approach too, because you could say the SOC team deploys security agents to all endpoints, but I don't know how many SOC team members actually log in and do the deployment of those. In the case of data loss prevention that Derek was just describing, and it says that team deploys the appliances to all your networks. Really? Do they do the racking and stacking? Are you sure? Could they find your data center on a map? Chances are they don't know how to do that part of the process that you may have assigned them accidentally.
So a good example that I think is this one, right? So we have process owners ensure that endpoint security agents are communicating with the security system prior to providing the system for use. And then application and system owners ensure that the endpoint agents are communicating throughout the system lifecycle. And the key thing here is we separate those so that the process owner, being the person that's maybe deploying endpoints or preparing servers for use, have to make sure before they hand it off that it's working. So when the application team takes it, they know that it's already in place. And there's not like a huge gap between them getting it and then configuring it. I've seen too many systems that were built temporarily and we just didn't install the agents, and that was the point of attack for a threat actor. And the other key part is we're focusing on communicating, right? Because I can't tell you how many times I've seen an organization install agents, but they didn't get the firewall rules right. So it's got to be that person's responsibility to actually know this thing is checked in. It sounds simple, but when you're measuring, did it get installed throughout your organization, but not did it actually talk to the endpoint server, it just creates the wrong focus for the organization. And those application system owners have to be responsible, just like they monitor how much memory is in use on the server. They've got to measure whether or not that agent's connected, and then be responsible for fixing it.
Now, we use this specific example because this happened to us. This is a real life example that we ran into. We actually measured the number of agents installed. And what we ran into is the number of agents that actually could communicate and were functioning was significantly different than the ones that were installed. Also, when you started doing some lift and shift things, or you start building out assets in the cloud, we found these instances where an en masse set would be following the same principles. So if they weren't able to communicate because the firewall wasn't clearly defined, that would be the case for everything that was underneath that project. And so it sounds so simple. And I think that's the trap that we fall in. Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. Everybody can hear and understand exactly what you're saying, but it's hard to do because it requires diligence and communication. And instead, maybe Derek says, well, the agent should be installed. And then everybody goes, aye, aye, Captain, and it's all installed, but it doesn't function properly. And getting back to, are you testing your controls? That's really how these things play together. You want to keep tweaking this. This was, I don't know how long it was, but it took us months to arrive at the right language. Now, when it comes time for audits, there are a couple of key takeaways I would drive. Number one, you want to make sure that you control that audit process so that you get the right information to the right person at the right time. You want to be careful about bringing the wrong person into the audit. And one of the reasons that this goes awry is because people may be nervous. They don't do it for a living. They're used to being locked in a closet like Derek and I often are. And we're just working on a particular problem. And so we don't have a lot of experience in talking to somebody who's trying to audit us. And so in that case, our day-to-day lives have to do with telling somebody pieces of information they don't know. So we tell the auditor a bunch of information that's not only not relevant, but opens up a whole series of other questions we don't want them driving into anyway, because it doesn't solve for the thing at hand. And so they may say, all right, so give me your control implementation process. And then they go, here's your control implementation process. By the way, we got a ton of stuff over here we don't implement, and we don't follow that process at all, which may not even be relevant to the scope. So you want to be super careful of that. When it comes to managing the scope, you also want to pay attention to what is the source of truth. We ran into this case on multiple different occasions. You probably have the same thing. What do you call a list of your assets? Is it in your CMDB? Is it a IM list of users? All these sorts of things. What you can find is that there are pockets of places in the organization that have this single source of truth, and that becomes the boundary for whatever assets they've included in the audit. So if you say, what is an asset that's been scoped for PCI, and you keep that information in what you have as the source of truth, but then they go interview somebody and that person says, well, yeah, but I keep a spreadsheet of everything that we do in PCI. well, then they're going to rope in the spreadsheet. So you want to be very careful with the way you put the information about scope in front of the auditors. The other thing is your data flow controls. If you have those cases where information is moving between boundaries and you don't have controls on the places in between those boundaries, that's a prime audit point right there. That'll make you fail left and right. Because what may happen is you describe your compliant assets as the ones within this boundary, and the reality is they identify things outside that boundary that are also not compliant, which means now the whole control is suspect because you can't even identify where these things are. So be very careful about the data flow controls and make sure you understand what is the timeline of moving these non-compliant assets into compliant assets.
So as you're managing audits, I think about a couple of other pitfalls, right? Like you have to get geo-based scoping correct. Let's say that you have an app to say you define geo for data, right? US data at an application level in your CMDB. And there's an application that has many instances, mostly in the US, but there's one in the UK. So as you start to develop your scope and you provide it to the auditors, they say, okay, we ran this through, and suddenly the entire UK data center is in scope for the US data audit. Yeah. Because that geo-based tag is applied at the wrong level, or the application owner didn't follow the instructions to then make that a separate application. Another one would be the exposure-based scoping. If you have a control that says, we have to have FIM on all external web servers, but you can't go to your CMDB to prove what's externally exposed and what's a web server, then you're going to end up installing FIM on every server that you have before your audit. And FIM is a control that doesn't scale.
When it comes to scoping, one of the most dangerous aspects is regulatory scoping. So going back to the UK example that Derek was describing, let's say you had a do not remember me clause somewhere, and you want to be bound by one of those, but your data exists in different locations. There isn't a case where there's a clear follow this method regulatory scoping system, and so that leaves us in this, is it NYDFS we're worried about here? Is it the FTC in this case? Are we worried about the SEC parts for notification? You know, it's pretty difficult for you to understand the implications of all these. So, and a good example for why you would bring legal into this review is because you want to say, in the event of regulatory scoping, and I think Derek would back me up, our biggest partners in getting these controls implemented effectively were actually some technical legal resources, because they would help us say, well, obviously this regulatory body has oversight. And so as you write these controls, you need to think about the fact that an auditor in that regulatory scope has oversight of the things you're doing, and you need to be able to hand them evidence that says you're following those regulations, and by the way, here are the regulations. You don't traditionally see that in the policy-based view because it's widely disconnected from the regulatory scope. So a good thing about these frameworks is they also include regulatory scoping and geo-based scoping by default in many cases. All right, so let's jump into the control implementations. You may see us talk about in control frameworks a split between control owner and control operator. This is a fairly simple concept, but again, hard to do. And what we're doing is we're teasing out the folks that are responsible for the oversight of the control and defining the requirements. We separate those folks from the people who are going to implement and manage the control. And traditionally in a security view, or traditionally maybe in a compliance view, one of the challenges that you have is you will sort of instinctively maybe go to the control operator is going to exist within your organization. But I think what we found is you're going to get better buy-in and you're going to get better results and likely get better guidance if you make sure that you pay attention to most of your controls from a security perspective. They're actually implemented by the IT teams. And so you need to make sure that they are a part of your process. They're a wholly ingrained participant in the outcomes and inputs so that they run the control. And if that's true, what you're going to find is some of those operators are going to be application teams. And you need to include them when you're going over the requirements or when you're defining your strategy to make sure that they can implement it. This is one of the areas that I would say we learned the most, the quickest, because we started off saying that a security team was going to be implementing it, and the reality is most of what we found is that the security team might be owners of a control, and they are doing oversight of what the operator does, but most of the work lives in the operators.
All right, so when you take your controls, you typically are going to break them down. I'm going to start talking more quickly. So you're going to break those down into a process and a solution. A solution, right, is typically not just a technology, but instructions for implementing that solution and how it implements the controls, right? And each one of those will then have a implementation process, how the control is implemented, and an evidence locker or an evidence process. So an evidence locker would be a specific technology where you take your evidence, you put it in, or it could just be a JIRA search, right, to find the right ticket. And your audit process is going to be used by the auditor to say, okay, I can take this, I can find the implementation process, and I can also find the evidence. And hopefully that is self-service, where they don't rush to the IR team every time and go, can you do this insane Splunk search that's probably going to bring it down? Oh, sorry, Chronicle search. It won't bring it down.
It won't bring it down.
Yes.
All right, so what you've got to make sure is that you have prepackaged solutions that are going to be easy for people to not only implement, but also to follow. And you want that evidence generation to be the control compliance true flag, right? You want to make sure that the business benefit that you're going to describe is that, listen, if you do this, it's going to be prepackaged and we're going to be compliant. That is going to relieve a whole series of troubles from downstream. And the more that you can self-service this, it tells people how I need to do it. It sort of gives them the way to know that it's been done right, because you're providing them buttons that provide the content back to them instead of going to the 4 people and trying to ask them, how do I do these requirements?
So some common pitfalls for solutions, I think, is that sometimes the security team thinks they're special and they build non-compliant solutions. So, you know, obviously the security tools are core control. They have to be compliant just like the application is. It's also a good opportunity to test your compliance processes. In unreliable solutions, each solution the security team builds has to be as highly available and redundant as the actual applications that are running, right? If your company has to deliver credit reports or background checks in milliseconds, you probably have to have security solutions that support those controls. And often the security team may be the wrong team to operate it. If your security team is based on, you know, risk and compliance and incident response, they probably have very little experience running operational technology. So don't think that it's like, well, we're going to make it better, we'll take over the firewalls. And as you go through, you really have to prioritize, you know, cross-functional problems. You may have a really high-level thing that you want to get done. It's your biggest priority. But the IT teams can't support you in any way because they're too busy. How do you make them less busy and get security things done, right? Like an example would be moving them to pure Azure AD managed workstations where they have zero-touch provisioning. You start to move them towards zero trust. You get better patch management and better compliance management over those systems. And it massively reduces IT process, right? So you always have to think about, how do I make the IT team's life better through security and through our budget? The security engagement process that people go, right, has to reinforce and assist with the full implementation of the control set, not little pieces. People have to know where they fit in that process. You can't even have the procurement team approve, say, a SaaS application, and then the application owner comes over to the security architecture team, and they're like, I see you bought this, but you can't put classified data in that. Right. And it doesn't support SSO. And each process has to have a clear pathway and requirements, right, with the defined processes and alignment. Oh, yellow light.
Right. You also have to make sure that you're driving both clarity and efficiency. If the control owners know what they need to manage, the control operators know what they need to run, and you know what you need to measure, then that's going to bleed into the application owners knowing what is expected of them as well. And what you're going to find is the efficiency of these solutions are going to drive the security teams to get a better measure as well. So all of these fit together. If you follow a standardized framework, everybody's measure is going to be the same measure, and the efficiency driven in one place has the ability to affect all of the solutions underneath it. Now, security controls must be, got to be measured, and you're going to make sure that it gets people in the right direction. The other thing they have to be is tested. You've got to make sure that people are going to identify the failure or gap after you've identified it as well, because often they're not going to come out right up front and say, by the way, my process doesn't work.
Yeah, I think when we look at a lot of these security controls, again, like vendors don't tell you their gap. They tell you everything's great. And a lot of times it's not that you're not going to buy the tool because they have a gap. It's everything has a gap, but you have to be able to engineer around it, right? So if you have, say, an endpoint product that you can run an instant search for every vulnerability in your system, and you run it and the person says, yep, boss, we don't have that vulnerability. But it doesn't tell you that that it only ran half of your environment as a result, or how many agents have checked in. Or it doesn't tell you that you have to run that over and over and over again to get consistent results. You may think that you just got everything and that you're clear without providing that input.
You're also going to find an example in CSPM tools that will tell you here's the compliance that you have for your cloud environment. But what you should go back and take a look at is how many of those are showing you assets that they don't have a policy for. Because most of the tooling, because it is not tested with your controls in mind, it's going to show you only the assets that they have a policy for. And so you're going to find when Google or Amazon invents a new service, it will not show up in the console for compliance. And that's probably not something that people lead with when they sell you the tool.
I like SNI's impact on vulnerability scanning. Right? SNI allows you to share multiple or share a single IP address by many websites that are secured with TLS. So if you load all of your IP addresses then into a vulnerability scanner and you scan, the load balancer only gives you the first site that's configured for that IP.
Right. Exactly.
You might be missing a few. Or if they're following in the very first page on that website is blank because maybe it's linked to from somewhere else. They're probably not going to scan that for vulnerabilities. But these are the kinds of things that you just really have to go through that testing process and understand it and then start building solutions around it.
So we've taken the hard work for some of these and we've published the control framework that we use in open source. So it's available here. You can just go get it on GitHub. We tried to abstract it in a way that you won't have to relearn all the things we did. We differentiated the main control set from technical requirements that are underneath it. Hopefully, we did a lot of the heavy lifting for you, but obviously happy to have some dialogue about it. I know we're running close on time and questions, but if you're interested in something that's in that set, you can feel free to reach out to Derek or I. We're happy to take questions now, or we can take questions after as well, so up to you. We have 52 seconds.
Looks like everyone's getting their free credit report too.
Yeah.
Except for Dave
Yes,
Donato, who left the room.
Just a quick one. Did you use any mapping tool like United Control Framework to map different frameworks?
We did a couple of different rounds of that, but at the end of the day, we ended up going back to just starting from NIST. And so what we found is if we baselined everything back to that, it was just easier to go to the other frameworks than it was to sort of abstract that via somebody else telling us the mapping. In some ways, I think it's more important for you to realize where the difficulty is in the mapping, and that's part of what those tools do for you, is they abstract you from that, but I think that's part of the benefit. I mean, it's just our take, but yeah. It's hard to say, but I think you were faster.
Sorry, will you be updating the framework for the 2.0?
Yes, we obviously do this as a side project for some of the teams there, but We try to update it whenever we get a chance. We take pull requests in the same location and everything, so we'll update it. Yes, sir?
My question is, this is a big elephant. So do you have like a maturity model in terms of how organizations could engage in this process? Like, I can't imagine, like, how, you know, I can't imagine you being able to hit all those checkboxes right away.
You wouldn't hit all those checkpoints right away, and I would say 100%. I wouldn't describe it as much about maturity as I would say identify the spots that's the most critical for you right now. When you get one of these frameworks, they're pretty much all built, and certainly we did it this way. We're expecting you only pull out the controls that you need. So we were very careful to give you these sliceable components where you could just plug in one piece. The reason I would push to do the framework, though, is because when you get another piece that you're going to do later, they're all going to fit together. If you did it in the policy-based approach, they don't often fit together, and that's why I would follow one of these as best you can to get everything working down the line.
Yeah, and you can follow, right, in this a maturity model just based on the control set that you use as well for it. And of course, we are always willing to help you build one. Not Equifax. They won't help you build one.
No, we'll give you a credit report, though. Okay, so we will take questions. Oh, we get time?
Yep. Let's do one more.
We're good.
Yeah, so this is...
Mic check. Microphone
Test,
check.
test, 1, 2, 3. Are we on?
Ah, there we go.
Okay, perfect.
I can hear you, Margaret.
All right, so this is a very timely talk for me. We actually have a client where we're looking to do a framework type assessment, look at their GRC program, and then kind of based upon our initial assessment, poise it for development across like a 6 to 8 month time frame. Do you have collateral from kind of a very high level assessment, you know, with kind of a mindset towards aligning to NIST 800? And if you do have that collateral, is it fit for sharing, or should I maybe reach out to you afterward?
Well, this control set is based on NIST CSF or 853. So, you know, we took the control set again and went through and for each control broke down the actual, like, you know, extended requirements for it and broke it into our own controls. The challenge is that you have to really build those based on the organization itself. And based on their own realities. You'll find controls in there that are from Equifax's consent orders, right? Probably not relevant for you. But it's a good starting place to work from.
Yep. And we're obviously available to chat about it if you want to. Okay, so I think
Thank
that's
you very
it.
much, Derek.
All right.
Thank you, Russ. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.